My name is Brooke Ellison. I'm 34 years old, and I had been married to Derek Coleman for 9 years when he ended our marriage while I was standing inside a client's unfinished kitchen. I was checking measurements for custom cabinets when my phone buzzed against the countertop. Derek's message said he had hired a lawyer. He would be moving out before the weekend. And from that point forward, he wanted finances handled officially. What bothered me first was not even the word divorce. It was how calmly he wrote it. Like we had already discussed everything, and he was simply confirming the plan. I called him once, but he did not answer. A minute later, another message appeared, saying that talking would only make things harder. I put my phone down and tried to finish the job. I measured the same cabinet opening twice and still wrote down the wrong number. My hands were steady, but my mind kept circling the same question. How long had he known he was leaving before he decided I deserved to know? When I got home that evening, the house looked normal until I opened our bedroom closet. Half of Derek's clothes were gone. His gym bag was missing, and the suitcase we kept in the garage was no longer there. Then I opened the drawer where he kept watches, chargers, and things he always forgot when we traveled. It was empty. That was when the message stopped feeling sudden. Derek had not packed after sending it. He had been moving pieces of his life out quietly while coming home every night and acting like nothing had changed. I stood there, looking at those empty spaces and realizing they had been empty before I knew. I did not know about Sabrina. I did not know there was another woman, another apartment, or another version of us being told somewhere else. All I knew was that my husband had prepared for a future without me before he told me our present was over. If he had planned leaving this carefully, I could not stop wondering what else he had planned without me. The next morning, I called Rebecca Dalton before changing anything. I told her Derek had moved out, hired a lawyer, and wanted our finances handled formally. Rebecca listened, then told me to keep paying every essential obligation that still belonged to both of us. The mortgage, insurance, utilities, and necessary household costs would stay exactly as they were. What changed were the extras I had covered because we were married. Derek's gym membership, car service, subscriptions, and the monthly transfer to his spending account were no longer shared obligations. Rebecca made the distinction clear because she did not want anger making decisions for me. I was not taking away anything Derek needed. I was simply no longer volunteering to fund his personal comforts. 3 days later, Peter Lawson contacted Rebecca because Derek had noticed. His membership payment failed. 2 subscriptions stopped renewing, and the monthly transfer he expected never arrived. Peter asked whether I was trying to punish Derek financially for leaving me. Rebecca answered calmly that Derek had his own income and no one was preventing him from using it. That was when the contradiction became impossible to ignore. Derek had spent months talking about independence. Yet when independence became expensive, he expected me to keep funding the arrangement he claimed had controlled him. He wanted separation to apply to responsibilities he no longer wanted, but not to comforts he had grown used to receiving. I sat in Rebecca's office, realizing my support had become an expectation instead of something he appreciated. I was not angry yet, and that surprised me. Mostly. I felt hurt that years of helping him had been rewritten as permanent obligations. I had never used those transfers to control where he went, what he bought, or who he spent time with. To me, they had simply been one more way of making our life easier. Then Peter sent Derek's request for temporary support, and the number made me read it twice. Derek wanted enough each month to preserve much of the lifestyle he had chosen to leave. I looked at Rebecca and asked the only question that made sense after everything he chose. If Derek wanted a new life without me, why did he still expect my money to make that new life comfortable? The first temporary support meeting was the first time I heard Derek explain our marriage to people who had never lived inside it. He said I had controlled the finances, made the important decisions, and left him feeling like he had no real voice. He also insisted Sabrina had not broken anything between us because our marriage had already failed before she came along. I sat beside Rebecca, wondering how 9 years could sound so unfamiliar when someone removed everything that did not support their version. What hurt most was hearing Derek say he never knew where our money went. Rebecca opened an old email chain and placed it in front of Peter. Years earlier, I had sent Derek a complete household summary and asked him to review every account with me. His answer was still there, telling me he trusted me and did not need to go through all those numbers. Then Rebecca showed other messages where Derek had told me how proud he was of the studio and how relieved he felt that I handled our long-term planning. Those words mattered because now he was presenting the same work as proof that I had chosen my business over him. I looked across the room and waited for him to meet my eyes, but he kept looking toward Peter. For the first time, I understood that Derek was not only leaving our marriage, he was changing the meaning of what had happened inside it. The temporary decision did not give me everything I wanted. I would still pay a reasonable amount of short-term support while the financial issues were sorted out. Rebecca had prepared me for that possibility, so I accepted it without treating the meeting like a contest I needed to win. What mattered was that Derek did not receive anything close to the lifestyle he had expected me to maintain. Then Rebecca noticed something in the financial disclosure that changed the direction of our questions. Derek's recent spending did not match the income and available cash he had reported. There were furniture purchases, an apartment deposit, and travel expenses that appeared before the date he claimed his relationship with Sabrina had begun. I stared at the timeline while Rebecca checked the dates again, and suddenly the affair was no longer the only thing that did not add up. Someone had been preparing for something much earlier. The dates kept bothering me, so Rebecca requested the records behind Derek's spending. What came back showed that he had been preparing for a new life long before he admitted the affair. He had moved part of his bonuses into a separate savings account for months. That money later covered the deposit on their apartment, along with furniture Derek had started buying before he ever told me he was leaving. At first, I thought the account was the worst part. Then Rebecca walked me through our household expenses from that period, and the picture became harder to ignore. Derek had been able to save those bonuses because I was still paying most of the mortgage, insurance, repairs, and major costs. He was building an exit fund while I was making room in his budget without knowing I was helping finance the beginning of his next life. The numbers exposed something Derek had not explained to Sabrina. The savings were enough to get him into the apartment, but nowhere near enough to support the future he promised her. He had talked about traveling, furnishing the place, and buying a house together within a year. It only worked if he received the financial outcome he expected from our divorce and kept more of the support I had provided. I did not contact Sabrina, but we eventually spoke about the timeline and apartment expenses. She was guarded at first, and she clearly expected blame. Instead, I asked when Derek had told her our 9-year marriage was over for good. Her answer came months before the day he had told me. Sabrina said Derek had described us as emotionally separated and waiting to finish the paperwork. I asked her one question: whether he had mentioned that I was still planning our anniversary trip then. She went quiet, and I watched her expression change as she understood what that meant. She seemed to realize that Derek had described a marriage I was not living. Then she told me Derek had promised they could buy a house within a year of the divorce. That stayed with me because I had seen his actual numbers. He had not only lied to me about where his money was going, he had given Sabrina a future his income could not support. Inside that promise was an assumption about how much of my money would follow him when he left. By then, the contradictions were impossible for Derek to explain away. To me, he said, Sabrina entered his life after our marriage was finished. To Sabrina, he said I knew it was over and we were only waiting on paperwork. To Peter, he presented himself as a husband who never had financial independence. The records told another story. Derek had moved bonus money aside, rented an apartment, and planned expenses before I knew he wanted to leave. Then Rebecca showed me a message Derek sent Sabrina when she asked whether divorce would leave him financially stretched. He told her not to worry because I would do the right thing and never let him struggle. I read that sentence twice before I understood why it hurt more than the affair. Derek had planned a future with another woman, while counting on the wife he was betraying to make that future comfortable. He did not think I would stay married to him. He believed the part of me that always cleaned up his problems would survive our marriage. Derek asked to meet after Sabrina began questioning the timeline he had given her. I agreed because we still had issues to resolve. But I was no longer interested in rewritten history. He said things with Sabrina had moved faster than he intended. Then he tried to explain that she had encouraged him to leave before he was ready. I stopped him there. Sabrina did not move his bonuses into an account, rent the apartment, or come home to me every night while preparing to leave. She did not send the message ending our marriage, and she did not promise herself money from a settlement that had not happened. Derek made those decisions. And whatever Sabrina believed, he was responsible for what he did inside our marriage. He went quiet because there was nowhere else to move the blame. A few days later, I learned Sabrina had left the apartment after realizing how much Derek had hidden from both of us. I did not feel victorious, and I did not contact her again. Their relationship ending could not return what I had lost. What mattered was seeing the pattern clearly. Derek had sold Sabrina a future built on money he expected from me, while selling me a marriage he had already started leaving. When both versions met the facts, neither could survive. The settlement took longer than I wanted, but I had stopped expecting the divorce to feel quick. Rebecca reminded me that the goal was not to leave Derek with nothing, and I agreed. He was entitled to what was his, just as I was entitled to protect what I had built. The process finally felt less like a fight and more like separating two lives. The studio remained under my control, although some value it gained during our marriage had to be considered. I did not love that, but I understood it. The house was handled through a buyout that accounted for our shared interests and the money Derek had failed to disclose. His hidden savings did not disappear because he hoped no one would ask. The temporary support also came to an end. Derek kept the property and money he was entitled to, but the final numbers were nowhere near what he had expected. The apartment was his responsibility now, along with every expense attached to the life he had chosen. I did not take his future away from him. I simply stopped paying for parts of it. By then, Sabrina was gone, and Derek's relationship with Monica had started to strain. He had followed advice that made leaving sound simple, but Monica could not absorb the consequences for him. The perfect exit he imagined depended on me continuing to make his life easier after he removed me from it. Once that assumption disappeared, what remained was a divorce with bills, compromises, and choices he had to carry himself. After everything was finalized, Derek asked if he could come to the studio. I almost said no, but there were no negotiations left, and nothing he could change. He arrived near closing time and stood across from me beside cabinet doors waiting to be refinished. He looked tired, but I no longer felt responsible for that. Derek said the settlement was harder than he expected, and none of this was supposed to happen this way. I looked at him and asked, "How was it supposed to happen?" He opened his mouth, then stopped, because an honest answer required him to admit what he had expected from me. He said nothing. For once, I let the silence belong entirely to him. Derek admitted what he had never said before. He thought I would be angry, then help him get settled because I always had. I asked why he had been so sure. He lowered his eyes and said, "Because you always did." That answer gave me the closure I needed. Derek had not only planned a life without me, he had planned it around the version of me who cleaned up his damage. I told him, "You didn't just plan a life without me. You planned it around what you thought I'd keep doing for you." He stood with nothing left to explain. I did not ask him to stay, and he did not ask me to forgive him. When he walked out of the studio, I watched the door close without following. His next problem belonged to him. Later, a client showed me a kitchen she wanted restored. The cabinet doors looked beautiful, but the frames behind them had warped and pulled away from the wall. She asked if refinishing the outside would save them. I told her the finish was not the real problem. If the structure underneath cannot carry the weight, I explained, you repair what is underneath, or replace what cannot be saved. I understood why those words felt familiar. I had spent years protecting the surface of a marriage that only one of us was maintaining. I do not regret loving Derek, and I do not regret helping him. What changed was believing love required me to protect him from choices he made carefully. Sometimes a boundary is simply the moment you stop rescuing someone from consequences they created. If you have wondered where support ends and carrying someone begins, tell me what you learned. And if this story stayed with you, like, share, and subscribe.